Some names that we or others have discussed are Jaylen Brown, Mikal Bridges, Pascal Siakam, and Kyle Kuzma. Jaylen Brown will require the Grizzlies to include one of Ja or Bane, so we already know that we're not doing that. They're not trading either Ja or Bane. Mikal Bridges is seemingly off the table because the Nets want to build around him, and I can understand why, because he's such a versatile player. I don't mean they're going to build around him as their top player, as their number one. But, when is Mikal Bridges not going to help you? He can shoot 40% from 3 and defend 1 through 4.
He can materially change your franchise's playoffs and championship odds.
Absolutely.
Sure.
Which is why if they weren't so keen on hanging on to him, I'd say take all the picks. You can have them. Because with Mikal Bridges on the roster, I think the Grizzlies would have the best starting lineup in the league and would be championship favorites. But anyways, we've already discussed potential deals for Pascal Siakam and Kyle Kuzma, both of which I would take in a vacuum. But let's get into some new deals for two players who would be just fantastic fits for the Grizzlies. And the first one is a deal that's already apparently been on the table at the last deadline, and this player's team refused it, but that's for OG Anunoby. So OG Anunoby is a rangy 3-and-D guy. He's 6'8", he's got great length, he's one of the best perimeter defenders in the league, generates steals and deflections, and he's not a guy who has the ball in his hands a lot on offense. He's not much of a passer or playmaker, but he did average 16.8 points per game on 38.7% three-point shooting last season. So he's the prototypical 3-and-D player. He's young. You'd have him for 2 more years of team control if you got him this offseason. And a deal that I would just so happily give up for OG Anunoby would be Tyus Jones, Zaire Williams, and 3 first-round picks. If you're the Grizzlies, are you offering that? And Karna, would you be willing to offer even more to get OG Anunoby, currently a Toronto Raptor, on this Memphis Grizzlies squad?
If I'm the Raptors, what I'm trying to get from this is Tyus, Zaire, 3 first-rounders, and probably Luke Kennard.
Yeah.
I'm trying to add one of those players. If not him, Santi Aldama. Especially if Siakam's gone. So, I mean, if I'm the Grizzlies, yes, I'm taking it. I'm hanging up the phone and I'm running to get the paperwork signed. But if I'm the Raptors, I'm coming back. I'm taking Luke Kennard. I mean, OG Anunoby. Whether it's Memphis Twitter, I'm sure the Grizzlies front office have heard it. I mean, he's a perfect fit. He's exactly what we need. I would argue that he's probably actually more versatile than Dillon Brooks defensively. He can actually score, which is a huge plus in the NBA from what I've heard.
And efficiently, too. I have heard that it does help to score. They changed the rule of basketball to where you actually have to put the ball in the basket to get points.
Yeah.
It's a terrible development for Dillon Brooks.
I'm not an X's and O's guy, but Dillon Brooks, you probably just need to score. That being said, OG Anunoby, if I'm the Raptors, I'm asking for Luke Kennard, or maybe even another first-round pick.
I would go up to 4 for OG if I'm the Grizzlies. At 5, you're just talking about a 5 first-round pick deal. It's just going to come back and bite you down the road. It's going to gut not just your depth now, but your depth in the future. It would be tough to give up Tyus and Luke Kennard, and that would also be a ton of salary. I'm not sure right off the top of my head if that would work financially, but those guys, I love them both, but you can replace them. You can find backcourt depth. You can't find a 6'8", 3-and-D guy like OG Anunoby without giving up a whole lot, both in your current roster and future picks. So, yes, we would both love Anunoby. Yes, we would both give up 3 to 4 first-round picks for him. But even with that, the Raptors may want to keep him because he's young, and you don't even know. He may develop into more of an on-ball guy. So let's get into another name, another young guy, maybe not quite as as young. I feel like we know more about who this guy is going to become. But that is Cam Johnson. Included as part of the Kevin Durant trade, Cam Johnson came to the Brooklyn Nets at the trade deadline. And he's actually a free agent this offseason, but he's going to be way more expensive than the Grizzlies have salary cap to afford. But in a sign-and-trade situation, he might theoretically be available. As we said, Tyus Jones and Zaire Williams gets you up to $23.5 million for a potential sign-and-trade. And you'd probably have to include at least one, if not two, first-rounders. They might want a big. The Nets might want a big because their big rotation's pretty thin. So maybe you have to throw in Tillman or Aldama in the deal. But, Karna, how much would you be willing to give up? Talk about picks, talk about players for Cam Johnson.
I would be willing to give up to 3 picks. Let me counter with something. Because if I'm the Nets, am I not asking for Steven Adams? Or Brandon Clark?
Yeah. So I don't know if they'd want Brandon Clark because I think any team is going to wonder.
Yeah.
Any team's going to wonder if he's ever going to be the same bouncy player. I believe he will because we've seen recently players like Dwight Powell recover from an Achilles and become athletic players again, but it's going to take a long time. And as far as Steven Adams go, like the Nets seem to want to continue to contend, and so I guess he makes sense. But, you know, a 30-year-old center who's had major injury problems recently, I don't know if you want to add him to a young team. So that's why I didn't put him on there, but I do think that you might get calls or at least feedback.
Yeah,
from the Nets.
no,
like,
he will.
Yeah.
He will. And I think he should be definitely in the discussion, right? So yeah, I would be willing to give up 2 to 3 picks. I think that you can have that right. Tillman or Aldama, yeah, you give them up. Aldama has more value in this scenario because he's able to stretch the floor, which they will lose if Cam Johnson leaves. Yeah, I mean, I think you have this right. I think 2 picks, Tillman or Aldama. If they want Steven Adams, they can have him too. Those are the players and picks I'd be willing to give up. 2 to 3 picks, Tillman, Aldama, and Steven Adams if they're looking for a big. Yeah, and I think that makes a whole lot of sense. That being said, he's on the older side of this.
Yeah, 27.
So if I'm in the Grizzlies front office, that's what I'm saying. I'm saying, look, if he's 25, sure, we'll give you 3 picks because we have his depth for a while. He's 27, and I know 2 years doesn't sound like a lot, but I'm 25 now, and I was 23 2 years ago, and I can feel the difference now. So I'm guessing.
Karna, you've been an old man for like a decade.
Yeah, I'm guessing there's a difference between 25 and 27. So yeah, I mean that would be my only thing. Is closer to 2 picks. You know, if I'm under 2.5 picks, I'm under 2 or under 2.5. And then I'll give up Tillman and Aldama for sure.
Yeah, I like those deals. I would not give up Tillman, Aldama, and Adams because then like who's playing post for you. But like if you want to include one, possibly 2 of those guys, and then a Tyus or a Luke Kennard, like it's expensive, but it's getting you the perfect missing piece. Just some stats on Cam Johnson. He's a career 39% 3-point shooter on very good volume. He averaged 18.5 points per game in this past year's playoffs and a career high 16.6 points per game in the regular season. He's a major plus defender, at least this past season. The Suns were 8.5 points better defensively with him on the floor. The Nets were 9 points better defensively with him on the floor. And he's 27, but with a sign-in trade, you'd have him locked up for 3 or 4 years, depending on the length of that contract. So, yes, you wonder if he's going to start to deteriorate at the end of that contract, but you're going to have him under team control for a while. I would definitely, if the money was right, be willing to give up quite a lot for Cam Johnson, talking like 3 first-round picks, 2 or 3 players. But Karna, those guys, Cam Johnson, OG Anunoby, they're great fits for a reason. They're excellent 3-and-D guys who don't need the ball much, In other words, the kind of guy every NBA team is looking for. So that's not likely going to work out. The Grizzlies are not likely to get either one of those guys. So in which case, here are a few other slightly less sexy names that nonetheless would fill Memphis's hole at the 3, at the small forward position, and I would argue provide an upgrade. So name number 1 would be Dorian Finney-Smith. Okay, we're going back to the Brooklyn Nets. If there's a team that the Grizzlies would like to and are likely to trade with, it would be the Brooklyn Nets, because they've got a lot of wings and they need guards and bigs. So they are weak in the areas the Grizzlies are strong, and strong in the areas where the Grizzlies are weak. So with Dorian Finney-Smith, you might not even have to give up a pick, because Tyus Jones, really a Tyus Jones swap for Dorian Finney-Smith works directly with salary. And honestly with fit too, because I think the Nets would like to have Tyus Jones as their starting point guard potentially. But would you throw a first-round pick in a deal for Dorian Finney-Smith in addition to Tyus Jones?
I mean, you have it in here, but the Mavs defense gets considerably worse if you take him out. So I think you can circumstantially say that he's a pretty good defender.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he does. I wouldn't throw first. Sorry, but to answer your question, no, I wouldn't. I would fight like HE double hockey sticks. Absolutely not to throw the first round pick in there. I think if you have Tyus Jones, that's enough, especially considering where the point guard position is for the Brooklyn Nets, right? Like, who's their primary ball handler right now, right?
Spencer Dinwiddie.
He's a 2. He's
and we already
a
know
2.
what Kyle Kuzma said about Spencer Dinwiddie. It's a nickname we're not going to repeat on this non-explicit podcast.
Yeah, and it was just, he's not the one to be handling the ball. Tyus Jones provides enough value. Is he going to be like a super contending? Like, are you going to win a championship with Tyus Jones as your point guard? Probably not. That being said, the Brooklyn Nets are not in a position in 1 year to win a championship, especially out of the East. So, I'm doing that deal. I'm doing that deal. No first-round pick.
Yeah, I would not want to throw a first-round pick in there, except the caveat is this year's first-round pick is number 25. We're going to talk about it hopefully next week. I don't really know what the Grizzlies intend to do with that pick anyway. Not sure if they know. So if it was a question of this year's first-round pick plus Tyus Jones for Dorian Finney-Smith, I actually think I would do that, reluctantly. And if it was Tyus Jones, no first-round pick, but plus a Jake LaRavia, not Santi Aldama, but Kenny Lofton, if they really wanted that. If they really wanted...
All right, you're going to really give up the Wemby stopper? You're going to give up the
it's
Wemby
risky.
stopper?
It's risky.
The
Spurs would be thrilled that you got him out of the West, but Tyus Jones plus a young player, I might also do that for Dorian Finney-Smith. He is a career 35.7% three-point shooter. In other words, a lot better than Dillon Brooks. He has been at nearly 40% on high volume over 2 complete seasons, 2020 to 21 and 21 to 22. And he's a low-usage offensive player. He averages just 8.3 points per game. That means he's the opposite of Dillon Brooks. He's efficient and doesn't shoot very much, whereas Dillon Brooks was inefficient and shot a lot. So I think he actually fits really well with the Grizzlies. And the stats don't show that he's an elite defender. He's not, but he's highly respected across the league as a defender. And it's not a coincidence that the Mavs defense totally cratered once he was traded to the Nets. He's 6'7" and a solid positional rebounder. So he's 30 years old, which is a bit of a concern, but he's under contract for at least 2 more years with a player option as last year, which is both good for the Grizzlies. You have him under team control. I mean, he's not that old, so you think he'll still be valuable. He provides a veteran presence, but also he doesn't fit with the Nets timeline. So as you were saying, I don't really know why the Nets would be desperate to hold on to Dorian Finney-Smith. I think he could be the Grizzlies' Bruce Brown. Or like the Knicks' Josh Hart. I know they didn't go as far, but he was another player who unlocked so much for them. Like Bruce Brown isn't a high-volume player, but he's the perfect connecting piece and a tough defender that brings the most out of the rest of your team. I think that's what Dorian Finney-Smith could be for the Grizzlies. But
yeah, I mean, I think like we talked about, right? Like, we have our core. We don't need to go swing for the fences, right? It's about putting the right pieces around that core that has A, been the problem, and B, well, I mean, not been a problem, but just hasn't worked, hasn't gelled the way that we needed it to win a championship. And, you know, there's extenuating circumstances, but at a certain point, you know, it's just, you got to make it work. And Dorian Finney-Smith can make it work in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, he certainly can. Yeah. And another guy that I think could make it work in a lot of ways and that could be available to the Grizzlies, albeit in a much more expensive deal, would be Jeremy Grant. So I almost included him with the OG and Cam Johnson names, but I didn't because he's not as good a fit, but he's probably similarly expensive. So Jeremy Grant at the Trailblazers, it would probably have to be a similar sign and trade to Cam Johnson, maybe even with more players in there, because $23.5 million for Tyus Jones and Zaire Williams, that may not be enough to get up to Jeremy Grant's salary. Jeremy Grant is an unrestricted free agent, but what the Grizz have to offer is not nearly enough, so it would have to be a sign and trade. So maybe the Blazers, being a bad defensive team, would be interested in Dillon Brooks sign and trade. Double sign and trade with Dillon Brooks and Jeremy Grant. Add in Tyus Jones in there. First round pick. Maybe you're doing something. But Grant is 6'8". He averaged 20.5 points per game last year as a 40% three-point shooter on solid volume, 5.8 attempts per game. Only 4.5 rebounds per game, which is a bit concerning given his size, but he's a plus defender. So, Karna, I think if you could get Jeremy Grant for 25 mil-ish, like Tyus Jones plus Zaire Williams plus one other player, name the young player that they want, I'm interested, but I'm afraid it's not going to be that much.
If I'm the Blazers,
he turned down a 4-year, $112 million extension.
Forget the salary for a second. If I'm the Blazers, I don't want any more young players. Like, so there's one of two ways that this Blazers franchise can go, right? You either stick to your guns, Damian Lillard, you have a high round draft pick. What are they, third or second?
They are third. Yeah, third.
So you're getting Scoot or Darius, or Brandon Miller.
Brandon,
right? Yeah. So it's like, at that point, are you gonna sign and trade Jeremy Grant for anything but picks? Like does Tyus Jones? Well, first of all, Dillon Brooks does not materially increase your chance to win anything. So does Tyus Jones and maybe 2 or 3 first-round picks get you there for a sign and trade? That's my only question. It's like, if I'm the GM, and not only that, let's say that we are really in sell mode. If I'm the Blazers, I mean, yeah, from the Grizzlies' perspective, yeah, you take this deal all day. Again, you sign the contract and you run away. And maybe he's not a good enough fit, but the guy can fill it up to a point where you need him to. And come on, 40% three-point shooter? Yeah, great fit for the Grizzlies.
At 6'8", yeah.
At 6'8", yeah, you love that. If I'm the Blazers, though, and the Grizzlies are coming to me to trade, I'm hanging up the phone. And then telling all the other franchises in the NBA that this is what the Grizzlies are offering me, and I know you can beat it. The only thing that we can offer them overwhelmingly is draft picks, right? Which does, you have to sacrifice your depth for a long time to get Jeremy Grant. So if I play this out like a chess game, 5 moves down, we are giving up picks, a lot of them. Do I want to do that? No. Am I willing to give up Tyus and some known quantities? Sure. Am I willing to give up the farm when it comes to picks? Absolutely not. And I'm guessing that's where the discussion would end up going.
Yeah. Notice I didn't include him in the 3 to 4 first round pick category because that's not the player that he is. Both because of fit and because I think we've seen Jeremy Grant be a good player on a bad team for a while now. And
sure.
I wonder if he can break that mold and get back to being a winning player again. So we don't love that deal. I mean, I would love Jeremy Grant on the Grizzlies in a vacuum, but given the cost, I just don't see it happening. Again, he turned down a 4-year, $112 million extension. So the only reason why he might not be a Blazer is because they probably don't want to pay him given that they're already an expensive roster and they're not going anywhere. But that also means, like, who is going to pay him? And I don't think it's going to be the Grizzlies. But
I have one for you before we head out. In the same vein as Jeremy Grant.
Yeah, go for it.
Or before we move on to the next segment.
Yeah.
Christian Wood.
No.
From the Mavericks. No?
I don't like
Run me through
I
why
don't like
not.
h's fit as a 3. I mean,
he's not a 3. He's not a 3.
He's a discount Jaren, right? Like he's not a defender actually, but he's a big who shoots threes.
He stretches the floor.
Himself. No, he definitely can. He's probably a better 3-point shooter than Jaren. He can
Much
create
better.
for himself, but he's not at all a defender. He doesn't fit as a 3. If the Mavericks were looking to give him away for nothing, then sure, we'll take him and put him on the bench, and he can come in and score 15 a game off the bench in 25 minutes. But I don't see him fitting with this current Grizz roster.
Are you not willing to give up some picks for that? Just that. I'm not saying he has a high. I'm saying he's not doesn't have a high trade price. It will be picks, right?
If the Mavericks are like, we are tanking and all we want are picks, and they're like, okay, 2 first-round picks get you Christian Wood
and Tyus. What about 2 picks and Tyus?
Oh, they want a Jalen Brunson replacement. Interesting. On the spot, I'm going to say 2 first-round picks plus Tyus for Christian Wood, a guy who seems to tank your culture and defense, is not a good idea. So, no.
I agree. But he's a former Rocket, so I just thought it would be funny to talk about.
Of course. Well, former Rockets, we know that they know how to play hard. They know how to play defense. Yeah. They're good for your team chemistry. All
Dylan Brooks, future Rocket. So,
honestly, this is a totally different discussion. I think Dylan Brooks could really help the Rockets. I think he would actually be a great fit there. And the only thing that makes me mad is they have cap space. They're not going to need to do a sign and trade. So it's going to mean he walks from nothing from the Grizzlies, and that's not good. But I digress. One more trade target, and then we'll briefly touch on free agency before getting out of here. Trade target, Bojan Bogdanovic. So he's on the Detroit Pistons. He's been relegated to being the best player on a bad team after being a good player on a contending team in Utah for a while. If the Pistons were interested in dealing him, which they probably are, would you be willing to give up Tyus plus Zaire or any of the other young players plus a first-round pick for Bojan Bogdanovic?
Yeah, I mean, he's not as good defensively as some of the other options that we've talked about, but he's able to stretch the floor. He does all the things that we need him to. I absolutely would. One thing I will push back on, Cade Cunningham is the best player on that team. I love that guy.
He was out last year. No, obviously. Cade Cunningham, I'm just saying, like, last year, Bogdanovic was, I believe, their leading scorer because they really had nothing. And I think it must have been, I don't know if it was cathartic for him to be the guy or if it was just nauseating and he felt like he was in a fever dream because he was just a year removed from being on contending teams.
He wants to win a championship. He's 34. He wants to win a championship.
But he's a career 39.6 3-point shooter.
41% last year. I mean, I would love to have him on the team. Would I give up a ton of like younger core players? Absolutely not. No, I wouldn't. He's 34. He'll have maybe 2-3 good years, maybe 2 years left of good basketball for the Grizzlies. I mean, can he help us win in the short term? Maybe. Do I think he tips the scale against the Nuggets? Which, if I'm the Grizzlies front office, that's how I'm also weighing some of these trades. Am I sacrificing some of my cores? Yeah. If I'm sacrificing some of this core, they really, really have to, and some of this potential, in whether it be a draft pick or a young player, they have to really be able to move the needle. I don't think Bojan does. He's suspect defensively. I don't know what his injury history is, but he played 59 games last year. So I would be very, very hesitant to throw a lot of capital at him when there are better options out there.
Yeah.
I mean, better options that we've discussed, right? Like, in this sense, you can swing for the fences, right? Like, if you're giving up a lot anyway for a subpar option, like, you might as well just full send it and, yeah, just like give up most of your capital, and then you know you can really contend with the Nuggets, right? Like, I'm not going to get like a middling player and then give up capital for him, not have as much capital for a swing for the fences trade. It's like the worst of both worlds, right? Like, it's really mid, right? Where you're actually playing the middle, and you're like, well, I got this middling player. He can be good for 2 years, but he isn't really going to move the needle against the Nuggets, and I gave up something for him, something considerable for him. Or am I going to use my picks for like my future, or am I going to give up all my picks, right? Like, you don't want to play in the middle there. Does that make sense?
I lost you for a second, but now I understand what you're saying. Yes, and
Yeah.
that's why I also am not pursuing a Bogdanovich trade if I'm the Grizzlies, because
He's just not good enough. Yeah.
I mean, he's a really good offensive player. Averaged almost 22 points a game on good efficiency last year. But he is a minus defender and has been that for years. This is not just an old age thing. So you're getting a 34-year-old elite shooter, but if he's your starting three, you're going to get eviscerated defensively. Doesn't matter how good Jaren Jackson Jr. is. Yeah, you're going to score a lot and you're going to win a lot of regular season games, but when it comes down to the switch hunting environment of the playoffs, you're going to get killed if Bogdanovich is your starting three next to Bane and Morant, which is already – Bane's a good defender, don't get me wrong, but he's small, and then Morant's already a target. So you're in trouble in that situation. But
yeah. When I said he wasn't a good player, I didn't mean he's not a good basketball player.
No.
When I say he's not good enough, I mean he's not good enough of a prospect for the Grizzlies to give up a lot of future capital. And
yeah.
For those of you not having the audio format and can't see my hands moving and gesticulations, what I was basically saying is like there's a spectrum here, right? The Grizzlies are either in firm win now mode, right, on one extreme, and they're willing to swing for the fences and get a person that really, really changes the odds of the franchise winning the, I almost said World Series, but winning the NBA championship.
Substantially changes the odds.
Yeah, substantially. Right, yeah, I mean, yeah, Bojan helps you a little bit. He won 2% in the Vegas sportsbooks, not that I make betting content. But on the other hand, you can keep your future prospects, really play the long game, and use those, right? So either use your draft capital, or your trade capital, and you swing for the fences, or you don't use your trade capital and you play the long game. What I really worry about with the Grizzlies is they make a bunch of small moves, and we talked about these small moves can be effective. Don't get me wrong. They can be effective and really help the chemistry of your team when you have transcendent players like John Morant and Nikola Jokic. But they make these really, really short-sighted plays like Bojan, who's 34 and can only help you for 2 years and can only be a piece for 2 years or 1 year, and doesn't fulfill all your needs, right? Someone who checks some of the boxes but not all the boxes. They need to be using their trade capital. The Grizzlies need to be using their trade capital to really find someone who checks all the boxes. And those are the guys that we talked with, like OG Anunoby checks all the boxes, right?
Yeah.
Cam Johnson, to a certain extent, checks all the boxes. And even though he lacks some chemistry, Jeremy Grant checks all those boxes, right? Like, they don't need to be giving away trade capital for a guy who may or may not check some of the boxes.
If Bojan was available at the trade deadline and at this point, let's say that Ja's back. For some reason, the Pistons decide they want another point guard, even though they already have two in Cade Cunningham and Killian Hayes. If it's like Tyus Jones plus 1 first-round pick for Bojan, and he's going to come be your bench gunner at the trade deadline, that's awesome. Let's do it, and let's go for the championship this year. But as an off-season trade where it's going to be already inherently more expensive, you're not going after him. So, Karna, what do you say we just like tease the free agents just very briefly now and then really get into that next week as a caveat to the draft stuff? Okay, so we'll do that. So we talked a lot about trades. We'll wrap that up here in a second. There is another avenue for the Grizzlies to fill that starting three void, though, and that is through free agency. The problem is that all that the Grizzlies have available to them is about $12 million via the mid-level exception. So the names you're going to get for $12 million in this year's NBA, it's not that great. But we'll talk about some of those names next week. But for right now, let's wrap it up with this, Karna. What is your favorite deal that we've discussed so far in terms of the bang for your buck, what you're giving up and what you're getting, and also just the player that you think fits best on this Grizzlies team that might theoretically be available?
I'll give you 1 and 2, and I'll make it quick. Cam Johnson, I think OG Anunoby is the best. I think it tips the scales on whether it's too expensive or not. So I think that one's obviously the best fit, but the ones that are probably more value focused and will lead to a even scale. Cam Johnson, the sign and trade. And then I really, really, really like Jeremy Grant. I really like him. I like the way he plays. It would be on the expensive end, yeah, but he's a guy that materially moves the needle. What he can do on defense, what he can do on offense, he gets you closer to the Nuggets in a big, big way.
So on my end, the number one player I would love to see on the Grizzlies is Mikal Bridges. That's not happening. So number 2 is really like 2A, 2B. OG Anunoby and Cam Johnson, for different reasons. I love both of them. Would be willing to give up 3, possibly 4 first-round picks for both of them, particularly considering you own the Warriors pick next year, so you could throw that one in there and you're not actually losing one of your own picks. So those guys I'm willing to really push the chips in for, Cam Johnson or OG Anunoby. But the third guy, who I actually, because of the price, I actually like more than a Jeremy Grant deal, is Dorian Finney-Smith. I think Jeremy Grant is I know he's a much sexier deal, and I think he's a great player who could fit well along the Grizzlies. But at the price you're going to get him, given that he's entering free agency this year, so he's going to be re-signing for something massive, something that's going to really push you into the luxury tax most likely. And we'll see if Robert Pera is actually willing to pay that or not. I just don't think. I hope so. But not a billionaire, so I can't. I cannot say what that would be like to pay the tax. Seems like it works. You got to be a taxpayer to win championships these days. Just saying, Robert Pera. But anyways, I don't think that Jeremy Grant's the guy you should be going into the tax for. And I think Dorian Finney-Smith, to me, seems like the Grizzlies' Bruce Brown. A guy who just fills all the little holes that your roster had in such an underrated and inexpensive way, such that you actually still have all your trade assets remaining, basically, to go make a bigger move later if you need. I think he's a solid upgrade. Dorian Finney-Smith would be a solid upgrade positionally for the Grizz, somewhat like Steven Adams for Jonas Valanciunas a couple seasons ago. You're giving up a more productive player. Jonas Valanciunas definitely more productive as a scorer than Steven Adams, but you're giving up a more productive player to get a better fit. Steven Adams doesn't need the ball as much as Jonas, is a better screener. That made him a better fit, better rebounder too. So I would definitely do the Dorian Finney-Smith deal if something for Cam Johnson or OG Anunoby doesn't work out.